I'm Sarah Mitchell, 34 years old, and I've spent the last decade as a nurse practitioner at Desert View Medical Center in Phoenix. 3 weeks ago, my world collapsed when my mother suffered a massive stroke. My younger sister Jennifer had been controlling every aspect of Mom's care, repeatedly telling doctors and family members that our mother Dorothy no longer recognized anyone. Standing beside Mom's hospital bed yesterday morning, Jennifer looked at me with that familiar condescending smile and whispered, "Face it, Sarah, she doesn't even know who you are anymore. Maybe it's time you accepted reality and let the professionals handle this." What Jennifer didn't expect was for Mom to squeeze my hand and whisper so softly that only I could hear, "Sarah, my brave girl, don't let them take me away." Before we jump back into this emotional journey, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Growing up in Scottsdale, Arizona, I was always the practical daughter, while Jennifer was the golden child who could do no wrong. Our father Robert worked as a mechanic at the local Ford dealership, his hands permanently stained with motor oil but his heart filled with pride for his 2 girls. Our mother Dorothy spent 35 years teaching 3rd grade at Saguaro Elementary, where she was beloved by generations of students who still sent her Christmas cards decades after leaving her classroom. Money was always tight in our household, but love was abundant, and Mom had this incredible way of making each of us feel special and understood. I learned early that I had a natural instinct for caring for others. When neighborhood kids scraped their knees, or when elderly Mrs. Garcia next door needed help with her medication reminders, I was the one who stepped up. Mom would watch me bandaging scraped elbows with the seriousness of a surgeon and tell Dad, "That girl has healing hands, Robert. She's going to help a lot of people someday." Jennifer, on the other hand, was the performer, the one who commanded attention at family gatherings with her dramatic storytelling and infectious charisma. She could charm anyone within minutes and had dreams of conquering the corporate world. Our paths diverged sharply after high school. Jennifer received a full scholarship to Arizona State University, where she studied marketing and business administration, graduating summa cum laude, and immediately landing a coveted position with a prestigious advertising firm in downtown Phoenix. She married David Hayes, a successful corporate lawyer, within 2 years of graduation, and they purchased a stunning home in Paradise Valley, complete with a pool and mountain views. Jennifer's success was everything my parents had dreamed of their daughters achieving the financial security and social status they'd never had. Meanwhile, I chose a different route that often left me feeling like the family disappointment. I enrolled in the nursing program at Phoenix College, working nights at a local diner to pay for my education while living in a tiny studio apartment near campus. The work was grueling, the pay minimal, and the respect even less. Jennifer would visit occasionally, always impeccably dressed and driving whatever luxury car David had recently purchased, offering unsolicited advice about how I could still change paths and pursue something more prestigious. She meant well, or at least I convinced myself she did, but her words stung nonetheless. Everything changed 5 years ago, when Dad suffered a massive heart attack while working under the hood of a customer's truck. He was only 62, seemingly healthy, and his sudden death shattered our family's foundation. Mom, who had always been the emotional anchor for everyone around her, seemed to shrink before our eyes. The woman who had spent decades nurturing other people's children suddenly appeared fragile and uncertain, as if losing Dad had stolen away part of her essential self. Jennifer handled the funeral arrangements with her typical efficiency, coordinating flowers, catering, and logistics while I sat beside Mom, holding her hand and watching her stare at nothing. During the service, Jennifer delivered a beautiful eulogy that had everyone in tears, talking about Dad's dreams for his daughters and how proud he would be of our accomplishments. I couldn't help but notice how she emphasized her own achievements while barely mentioning my nursing career, though perhaps that was just my grief making me overly sensitive. After Dad's funeral, it became clear that Mom couldn't continue living alone in the family home where every corner held memories of her 40-year marriage. Jennifer and David offered to help her downsize, and I supported the decision to sell the house and move Mom into Sunrise Hills Retirement Community, a lovely facility that offered independent living with optional services as needed. The transition was difficult for Mom, but she gradually adjusted, making friends with other residents and finding purpose in volunteer activities like reading to children at the community library. I made it my mission to visit Mom at least 3 times a week, often stopping by after long shifts at the hospital. We would sit in her small but comfortable apartment, sharing tea and talking about everything from her former students to my challenging cases at work. Mom had always been an excellent listener, and she seemed genuinely interested in the medical complexities I encountered daily. She would ask thoughtful questions about patient care, treatment protocols, and the emotional toll of working with sick and dying people. These conversations became precious to me, a reminder that someone valued my expertise and dedication. Jennifer visited less frequently, usually on Sundays with David and their 2 young children, bringing expensive gifts and updates about her latest career achievements. She had been promoted to senior marketing director and was constantly traveling for work, attending conferences, and managing high-profile clients. When she did visit, the conversations typically centered around her professional successes or her children's academic and athletic accomplishments. Mom would listen politely and express appropriate pride, but I could sense a distance that hadn't existed when we were children. About 6 months ago, I began noticing subtle changes in Mom's behavior that concerned me professionally, even as they broke my heart personally. She would occasionally repeat stories within the same conversation, forget names of longtime friends, or seem confused about what day of the week it was. As a nurse practitioner specializing in geriatric care, I recognized these as potential early signs of cognitive decline. But I wasn't sure how to address them without seeming alarmist or overstepping boundaries as a daughter, rather than a medical professional. I gently suggested that Mom mention these memory lapses to her primary care physician during her next routine appointment, emphasizing that early intervention could make a significant difference in managing any cognitive changes. Mom agreed but seemed reluctant to worry her doctor or family members with what she described as normal aging nonsense. I respected her autonomy while privately documenting the incidents I observed, hoping that any concerning patterns would become apparent to her medical team during regular checkups. Jennifer remained largely unaware of these subtle changes, though I wasn't sure if that was because Mom concealed them better during her less frequent visits, or because Jennifer was too distracted by her own busy life to notice. When I casually mentioned my observations during one of our monthly sister phone calls, Jennifer dismissed my concerns as professional paranoia, saying, "Sarah, you see medical problems everywhere because that's your job. Mom is fine. She's just getting older, and you're overthinking everything like you always do." Her response stung, but I convinced myself that Jennifer's perspective might be valuable as an objective observer who wasn't influenced by medical training. Perhaps I was being overly cautious, seeing pathology where there was simply normal aging. I decided to monitor the situation quietly while encouraging Mom to maintain her independence and dignity for as long as possible. The stroke happened on a Tuesday morning 3 weeks ago. Mom had been participating in her usual water aerobics class at the retirement community when she suddenly collapsed beside the pool. According to witnesses, she had been laughing with friends one moment and unconscious the next. The facility's staff called 911 immediately, and Mom was transported to Desert View Medical Center, where I worked. The irony of having my own mother arrive as a patient in my workplace was overwhelming, and I had to excuse myself from my scheduled patients to handle the emergency. Dr. Patricia Chen, the neurologist on call, quickly determined that Mom had suffered a significant ischemic stroke affecting the left hemisphere of her brain. The initial CT scans showed considerable damage to areas responsible for speech, comprehension, and motor function on her right side. Dr. Chen explained that the extent of cognitive impact would become clearer as the swelling reduced and Mom regained consciousness. But the early indicators suggested serious long-term effects on her ability to communicate and process information. Jennifer arrived at the hospital within an hour, having rushed from an important client meeting downtown. She immediately took charge of the situation with her characteristic efficiency, coordinating with medical staff, contacting insurance companies, and fielding calls from concerned friends and family members. I was grateful for her organizational skills during those first chaotic hours, even as I struggled to balance my roles as both a daughter and a medical professional who understood the gravity of Mom's condition better than anyone else in our family. During those initial days, Mom remained unconscious while her brain fought to heal from the massive trauma. Jennifer and I took turns maintaining bedside vigils, though our approaches differed significantly. Jennifer treated the situation like a project to be managed, creating schedules for visitors, researching rehabilitation facilities, and consulting with financial advisors about long-term care costs. I focused on the medical aspects, communicating with doctors, monitoring Mom's vital signs, and watching for any subtle changes that might indicate improvement or decline. When Mom finally began showing signs of consciousness after 5 days, preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Jennifer was the first person she saw. Mom's eyes opened slowly, unfocused and confused, as she attempted to process her unfamiliar surroundings. Jennifer immediately began talking to her in the bright, cheerful voice she used with her young children, explaining where she was and what had happened. Mom stared at Jennifer without any apparent recognition, her expression blank and unresponsive. Dr. Chen later explained that this lack of recognition was common immediately following stroke and didn't necessarily indicate permanent cognitive damage. However, when I approached Mom's bedside later that same day, her reaction was identical. She looked at me with the same vacant expression, showing no signs of understanding who I was or why I was there. The lack of recognition from the woman who had been my closest confidant and supporter was devastating on a personal level. Even though I understood medically that early post-stroke confusion was normal and often temporary, Jennifer began telling everyone that Mom's cognitive damage was severe and permanent. She spoke with doctors about long-term care options, contacted social workers about disability benefits, and researched memory care facilities that could provide specialized attention for patients with significant dementia. While I appreciated her practical approach to planning for Mom's future needs, I was concerned that she was making assumptions about Mom's prognosis before allowing adequate time for recovery. As a medical professional, I knew that stroke recovery could be unpredictable, and that improvements sometimes occurred weeks or even months after the initial incident. The brain's ability to form new neural pathways and compensate for damaged areas, known as neuroplasticity, meant that early assessments didn't always predict long-term outcomes. I tried explaining this to Jennifer, suggesting that we give Mom more time before making irreversible decisions about her care, but Jennifer seemed impatient with what she called my false hope. The tension between us escalated when Jennifer announced her intention to transfer Mom to Rosewood Care Facility, an expensive memory care center that specialized in patients with severe cognitive impairment. Jennifer had researched the facility extensively and was impressed by their amenities, specialized staff, and reputation for managing challenging dementia cases. The cost was substantial, requiring most of Mom's retirement savings and the proceeds from selling her apartment at Sunrise Hills. But Jennifer argued that Mom deserved the best possible care regardless of expense. I objected to the transfer for several reasons, both medical and personal. From a medical standpoint, I believed Mom needed more time in acute rehabilitation before being categorized as requiring memory care. Her physical therapy was showing promising results, and her vital signs remained stable, suggesting that her body was healing well from the stroke. Additionally, memory care facilities typically provided comfort care rather than active rehabilitation, which could limit Mom's potential for recovery. On a personal level, I was troubled by Jennifer's apparent eagerness to institutionalize Mom, rather than exploring alternatives that might preserve her dignity and independence. I suggested considering in-home care or assisted living options that would provide necessary support while allowing Mom to maintain some autonomy. Jennifer dismissed these alternatives as impractical and expensive, though the costs were comparable to the memory care facility she preferred. Our disagreement came to a head yesterday morning when Jennifer arrived at the hospital with transfer paperwork already completed and admission scheduled for the following day. She had made all these arrangements without consulting me, despite my medical expertise and intimate knowledge of Mom's preferences and personality. When I questioned her unilateral decision-making, Jennifer exploded with frustration that had apparently been building for weeks. "You need to accept reality, Sarah," she said, her voice sharp with impatience. "I know this is hard for you, because taking care of people is your thing, but Mom is beyond help now. She doesn't recognize either of us, she can't communicate, and she needs professional memory care. I'm not going to enable your denial by pretending that love and good intentions can fix brain damage. Her words hit me like a physical blow, not just because of their harshness, but because they revealed how little Jennifer understood about both stroke recovery and our mother's actual condition. I had been observing subtle signs of improvement that Jennifer either missed or dismissed as wishful thinking. Mom's eyes had begun tracking movement around her room. She responded to certain voices with changes in facial expression, and her grip strength was gradually returning. These might seem like minor improvements to a layperson, but they indicated that her brain was actively working to heal and reconnect damaged pathways. That afternoon, I sat beside Mom's bed during my lunch break, holding her hand and talking softly about memories from our childhood. I told her about the time she taught me to braid friendship bracelets for my classmates, how she stayed up all night helping me finish a science project I'd procrastinated on, and the way she used to sing while making breakfast on Sunday mornings. As I spoke, I noticed her fingers moving slightly against mine, not random muscle spasms, but deliberate, gentle squeezes that seemed to correspond with emotional moments in my stories. When Jennifer arrived for her evening visit, she found me still sitting beside Mom, continuing our one-sided conversation. Jennifer's expression immediately hardened with what I recognized as her disappointed older sister. Look, the same expression she'd worn when catching me sneaking cookies before dinner as children. "Sarah, you're torturing yourself and probably confusing her," Jennifer said, settling into the visitor chair with an audible sigh. "The doctors have been clear about her condition. She doesn't understand what you're saying, and sitting here talking to her like she's still the same person is just making this harder for everyone." I started to explain about the subtle responses I'd been observing, but Jennifer cut me off with a wave of her hand. She had appointments to keep, calls to return, and a family waiting at home. She didn't have time for what she clearly considered my delusional hope that Mom could somehow magically recover from severe brain damage. "Look," Jennifer said, standing up and gathering her expensive purse and jacket. "I understand that you've built your identity around being the caregiver, but sometimes the kindest thing is knowing when to let go. Mom wouldn't want to live like this, trapped in a body that can't communicate or recognize her own daughters. The memory care facility will keep her comfortable and safe, which is all we can do now." As Jennifer moved toward the door, she paused beside Mom's bed and spoke directly to her, though she clearly expected no response. "I love you, Mom. I'm going to take good care of you, I promise." Mom's eyes remained closed, her breathing steady and peaceful. After Jennifer left, I continued sitting with Mom as afternoon faded into evening. The hospital corridor grew quieter as day shift nurses completed their handoffs and evening staff settled into their routines. I found myself thinking about all the times Mom had sat beside my bed when I was sick as a child, reading stories, bringing soup, and somehow making everything feel safer just by being present. "I don't know if you can hear me," I whispered, leaning closer to her ear, "but I need you to know that I haven't given up on you. Jennifer thinks I'm being unrealistic, and maybe she's right, but I've seen too many patients surprise everyone with their recovery to stop believing in possibilities." As I spoke these words, something remarkable happened. Mom's eyes opened slowly, focusing on my face with a clarity I hadn't seen since before the stroke. Her mouth moved as if she was trying to speak, though no sound emerged initially. I held my breath, afraid to move or speak and break whatever fragile connection was forming between us. Then, so softly I might have imagined it, Mom whispered, "Sarah." Not a random vocalization or confused mumbling, but my name spoken with perfect clarity and unmistakable recognition. My heart nearly stopped as she continued, "My brave girl, don't let them take me away." The words were barely audible, requiring enormous effort from her damaged brain and weakened vocal cords, but they were unmistakably intentional and coherent. Mom knew exactly who I was, understood her situation, and was trusting me to advocate for her when she couldn't advocate for herself. The validation was overwhelming, not just because it proved my observations about her improving condition, but because it confirmed that our special bond had survived even severe brain trauma. That whispered moment with Mom changed everything, but I knew I couldn't simply rush to Jennifer with claims that our mother had spoken my name. Jennifer had already made up her mind about Mom's condition, and without witnesses or documentation, my word alone wouldn't be enough to challenge the medical decisions she'd set in motion. I needed to approach this strategically, gathering evidence and building a case that even Jennifer's stubborn certainty couldn't dismiss. The next morning, I arrived at the hospital 2 hours before my shift began, wanting to spend time with Mom while the corridors were still quiet and I could focus entirely on observing her responses. I brought a small notebook where I began documenting every interaction, recording the date, time, and specific details of any reactions or behaviors that suggested awareness beyond what her medical chart indicated. If I was going to challenge Jennifer's assessment and the medical team's prognosis, I needed concrete evidence rather than emotional pleas. Mom appeared to be sleeping when I entered her room, but I noticed immediately that her breathing pattern was different from the deep, unconscious rhythm she'd maintained during the first week after her stroke. Her respiration was lighter, more variable, suggesting that she might be in a lighter stage of sleep, or even pretending to rest while remaining aware of her surroundings. This was actually a positive sign, indicating that her brain was regaining some of its normal sleep-wake cycles, rather than remaining in the confused twilight state that often follows severe neurological trauma. I settled into the bedside chair and began speaking softly, telling Mom about the sunrise I'd witnessed while driving to the hospital, and how the desert sky had reminded me of the watercolor paintings she used to create during her summer breaks from teaching. As I spoke, I watched carefully for any subtle responses, facial muscle changes, eye movement beneath closed lids, or variations in her breathing that might indicate she was processing my words. Within minutes, I observed several encouraging signs. Mom's facial expression softened slightly when I mentioned her paintings, and her left hand moved almost imperceptibly against the blanket when I described the colors of the sunrise. These responses were minimal, barely noticeable to someone not trained to recognize subtle neurological improvements, but they represented significant progress from the complete unresponsiveness she'd shown during the first days after her stroke. I continued talking, shifting topics to see if different subjects would produce different responses. When I mentioned Jennifer's children, Mom's breathing remained steady and unchanged. When I talked about her former students at Saguaro Elementary, her eyelids fluttered slightly. When I described the volunteer work she'd been doing at the community library, reading to children, her lips moved almost as if she was trying to form words. The most dramatic response came when I mentioned Mrs. Garcia, our elderly neighbor from childhood, who had recently passed away. Mom's eyes opened suddenly, focusing on my face with startling clarity. She stared at me for several seconds, and I could see her mind working, processing information and trying to communicate something important. Her mouth moved silently, forming shapes that looked like words, though no sound emerged. I leaned closer, encouraging her gently. "It's okay, Mom. Take your time. I'm listening." The effort was clearly exhausting for her, but she managed to whisper, "Funeral?" The single word was crystal clear, showing not only that she recognized me and understood our conversation, but that she was concerned about missing Mrs. Garcia's funeral and wanted to know what had happened. I explained that Mrs. Garcia's funeral had been held the week before Mom's stroke and that I had attended on behalf of our family. Mom's expression relaxed with relief, and she squeezed my hand with surprising strength. This interaction lasted less than 5 minutes, but it provided irrefutable evidence that Mom's cognitive abilities were far better than anyone realized. She was processing complex information, showing emotional responses, and communicating coherently when given patience and encouragement. Over the next several days, I established a routine of visiting Mom during different times, documenting her responses and gradually discovering patterns in her awareness levels. She seemed most alert during late morning and early evening, times when the hospital was less chaotic and she could focus without distraction. During these windows, Mom would often respond to questions with gestures, facial expressions, or even single words, though she tired quickly and would retreat back into apparent unconsciousness when the effort became too much. I began bringing items from home that might trigger positive memories or responses. A small photo album from her teaching years produced immediate recognition, with Mom pointing to specific students and even attempting to say their names. Her favorite coffee mug from the retirement community made her smile genuinely for the first time since the stroke. Most significantly, when I brought the small wooden cross that had belonged to her mother, Mom clutched it to her chest and whispered a prayer I remembered her saying at bedtime throughout my childhood. These interactions convinced me that Mom was not only aware but actively working to recover her abilities. Her brain was clearly forming new neural pathways around the damaged areas, a process that could take months or even years, but showed remarkable potential for improvement. The key was providing her with consistent stimulation, familiar triggers, and patient encouragement, rather than the passive care approach that assumed she was beyond rehabilitation. Marcus Williams, my colleague and friend from the neurological unit, had been quietly observing my visits and the changes in Mom's condition. Marcus was one of the most experienced nurse practitioners at Desert View, with 15 years of experience working with stroke patients and their families. His opinion carried significant weight with both doctors and hospital administration, making him a valuable ally in my growing campaign to reassess Mom's prognosis. "Sarah, I've been watching your mother's responses during your visits," Marcus said one afternoon as we grabbed coffee in the hospital cafeteria. "I know the official assessment is that she has severe cognitive impairment, but I'm seeing things that don't align with that diagnosis. Her eye tracking is too purposeful, her responses are too consistent, and her improvement trajectory is too steady for someone with the level of brain damage described in her chart." I felt a surge of relief that someone else had noticed what I'd been documenting. "Marcus, she's been speaking to me. Not constantly, and not in long conversations, but clear, coherent words that show she understands what's happening around her. Yesterday, she asked about her apartment at Sunrise Hills and whether her plants were being watered. That's not random vocalization. That's complex thinking about her living situation and responsibilities." Marcus nodded thoughtfully. "Have you discussed these observations with Dr. Chen? I know she's been conservative in her prognosis, but if your mother is showing consistent signs of cognitive improvement, the treatment plan should be adjusted accordingly. Moving her to memory care would actually hinder her recovery by removing the stimulation and challenges she needs to continue rebuilding her neural connections." This conversation with Marcus gave me the courage to request a formal meeting with Dr. Chen to present my documented observations and advocate for a revised assessment of Mom's condition. I spent 2 days organizing my notes, creating a timeline of improvements, and preparing a presentation that would demonstrate the pattern of recovery I'd been witnessing. If I could convince Dr. Chen to order additional cognitive testing, we might be able to prove that Mom's potential for recovery was much greater than initially believed. Dr. Chen agreed to meet with me on a Friday afternoon, though she seemed skeptical about the purpose of our discussion. "Sarah, I understand that accepting your mother's limitations is difficult, especially given your medical background. Sometimes our professional knowledge can make us see improvements that aren't really there, because we want so desperately for our loved ones to recover." I presented my documentation methodically, showing Dr. Chen the timeline of responses, the specific triggers that produced the most dramatic improvements, and the progression from unconsciousness to limited but meaningful communication. I played several short video recordings I'd made on my phone, with Mom's permission, showing her responding to questions and recognizing familiar objects. Dr. Chen studied my evidence with the careful attention she would give any medical presentation, asking questions about timing, consistency, and potential alternative explanations for the behaviors I'd documented. As a neurologist, she was trained to be cautious about premature optimism in stroke cases, knowing that families often interpreted random movements or vocalizations as meaningful recovery when the brain damage was actually irreversible. However, the accumulated evidence was compelling enough that Dr. Chen agreed to order a comprehensive neurological reassessment, including updated brain imaging and cognitive testing designed specifically for stroke patients with communication difficulties. "Sarah, I want to be clear that even if your mother is showing more awareness than we initially believed, her recovery may still be limited. Stroke damage is unpredictable, and early improvements don't always translate to long-term functional recovery." I understood her caution, but I was thrilled that she was willing to reconsider Mom's prognosis based on new evidence. The testing was scheduled for the following week, which gave me time to prepare Mom for the assessments and continue documenting her improvements. More importantly, it gave me concrete medical justification for delaying the transfer to Rosewood Care Facility until we had a complete picture of her actual condition. When I told Jennifer about the planned reassessment, her reaction was immediate and intense. "Sarah, this is exactly what I was afraid of. You're grasping at straws and convincing yourself that Mom is getting better because you can't accept the reality of her condition. Now you're wasting medical resources and delaying necessary care because you think you know better than the doctors who've been treating her. Jennifer's frustration was understandable from her perspective. She had already made arrangements with Rosewood, coordinated the financial aspects of Mom's care, and emotionally prepared herself for managing a mother with severe dementia. My insistence that Mom was improving undermined all of those preparations and forced her to reconsider decisions she thought were final. "Jennifer, I'm not making this up," I responded, trying to keep my voice calm and professional. "I have documentation, videos, and now Dr. Chen agrees that Mom deserves a comprehensive reassessment. All I'm asking is that we base our decisions on current medical evidence rather than assumptions made during the first week after her stroke." Our argument escalated quickly, with Jennifer accusing me of using my medical credentials to manipulate the situation, and me pointing out that she had been making unilateral decisions without consulting me or considering Mom's own wishes about her care. The tension between us reached a breaking point when Jennifer threatened to contact hospital administration to complain about my unprofessional involvement in Mom's case. "You're too emotionally invested to make rational decisions," Jennifer declared. "I'm going to speak with the social worker about limiting your access to Mom's medical information. You're a nurse practitioner, not her doctor, and you're clearly not capable of maintaining appropriate boundaries between your professional and personal roles." This threat terrified me because Jennifer had the legal authority to restrict my involvement in Mom's care. As the designated healthcare proxy, she could potentially prevent me from visiting during medical consultations or accessing information about Mom's treatment. I realized that I needed to accelerate my evidence gathering and build stronger support among the medical team before Jennifer could undermine my position. I reached out to Aunt Linda, my mother's younger sister who lived in Tucson and had maintained a close relationship with Mom throughout their adult lives. Linda had always been the family mediator, the person who helped resolve conflicts and maintained communication between relatives who might otherwise drift apart. More importantly, she had spent considerable time with Mom during the months before the stroke and could provide valuable perspective on her sister's actual mental state and capabilities. Linda drove up from Tucson that weekend, arriving at the hospital with the no-nonsense attitude that had made her successful as a social worker specializing in elder care. She spent 3 hours sitting with Mom, talking about their childhood in rural Arizona, their parents who had immigrated from Mexico, and shared memories that spanned 7 decades of sisterhood. During Linda's visit, Mom was more responsive than I had ever seen her. She smiled frequently, attempted several words, and even laughed softly when Linda reminded her about a particularly embarrassing incident from their teenage years. Most significantly, when Linda asked directly, "Dorothy, do you understand where you are and what happened to you?" Mom nodded clearly and whispered, "Hospital. Sick. Getting better." Linda was amazed by the level of awareness Mom demonstrated, having expected to find her sister in the vegetative state that Jennifer had described during their phone conversations. "Sarah, your sister either hasn't spent enough time observing your mother's responses, or she's choosing to see only what confirms her predetermined conclusions. Dorothy is clearly impaired and needs significant support, but she's nowhere near the level of cognitive damage that would require memory care." This validation from a family member with professional experience in elder care gave me additional ammunition for the upcoming medical reassessment. Linda agreed to attend the testing session as Mom's advocate, providing both family support and professional perspective on appropriate care options. Her presence would also serve as a buffer between Jennifer and me, helping to keep our personal conflict from interfering with Mom's medical evaluation. The cognitive testing took place on a Tuesday morning in Dr. Chen's office, with Linda and me present as family representatives. Jennifer had initially planned to attend, but was called away for a work emergency, something that happened frequently when Jennifer was faced with situations she couldn't control or manage according to her preferences. The assessment began with basic orientation questions designed to evaluate Mom's awareness of time, place, and situation. Dr. Chen spoke slowly and clearly, giving Mom time to process each question and formulate responses. When asked about the current year, Mom hesitated but correctly identified it as 2024. When asked about the season, she looked toward the window and said, "Spring," which was accurate. Most impressively, when asked to identify the people in the room, she pointed to each of us and said our names. Dr. Chen, Linda, Sarah, The testing continued with more complex tasks designed to evaluate memory, reasoning, and communication abilities. Mom struggled with some of the exercises, particularly those requiring rapid verbal responses or fine motor coordination, but she demonstrated clear understanding of instructions and made logical attempts to complete each task. When asked to describe what had happened to her, she said slowly but clearly, "I fell down. Brain hurt. Hospital helping." Dr. Chen also conducted physical assessments, testing Mom's strength, coordination, and sensory responses. While the stroke had clearly affected her right side, causing weakness and reduced sensation, her left side showed normal function, and her reflexes were appropriate for someone recovering from neurological trauma. Most encouraging was her ability to follow complex commands, such as, "Touch your nose with your left hand and then point to the door," which indicated that her comprehension and motor planning abilities were largely intact. The results of the comprehensive assessment painted a dramatically different picture than the initial post-stroke evaluation. While Mom clearly had deficits that would require ongoing therapy and support, her cognitive abilities were far better preserved than anyone had realized. Dr. Chen's revised diagnosis indicated moderate cognitive impairment with good potential for continued recovery, rather than the severe dementia that had justified the memory care placement Jennifer had arranged. Based on these results, Dr. Chen explained, "Your mother would benefit most from intensive rehabilitation in a setting that provides speech, occupational, and physical therapy, while maintaining cognitive stimulation." Memory care facilities typically focus on comfort and safety, rather than active rehabilitation, which would actually limit her recovery potential. Linda and I exchanged triumphant glances, knowing that this medical opinion would completely change the discussion about Mom's future care options. Instead of the expensive memory care facility that assumed Mom's condition was permanent and irreversible, we could now explore rehabilitation programs designed to maximize her recovery and eventually return her to some level of independent living. However, Dr. Chen also emphasized the importance of family unity in supporting Mom's recovery. Rehabilitation requires consistent encouragement, patient communication, and coordinated care among family members. If there's significant conflict about treatment approaches, it can actually hinder the patient's progress by creating stress and confusion. This observation highlighted the biggest challenge still facing our family. The medical evidence now supported my position that Mom had greater recovery potential than Jennifer believed. But convincing Jennifer to abandon her carefully laid plans for Rosewood care would require delicate negotiation and probably some uncomfortable admissions about her rush to judgment. I left the hospital that afternoon feeling cautiously optimistic about Mom's prognosis, but deeply concerned about the family dynamics that could still undermine her recovery. Jennifer had built her identity around being the responsible daughter who made difficult but necessary decisions, and asking her to acknowledge that those decisions had been premature would be challenging for someone who prided herself on always being right. The real test would come when Jennifer learned about the assessment results and had to choose between her ego and her mother's best interests. Based on our recent conversations, I wasn't entirely confident which choice she would make, but I was determined to advocate for Mom, regardless of the personal cost to my relationship with my sister. As I drove home that evening, I reflected on how much had changed since that first whispered moment when Mom had said my name. What had begun as a desperate hope that my mother was more aware than anyone realized had evolved into documented medical evidence supporting a completely different approach to her care. The battle wasn't over, but for the first time since Mom's stroke, I felt like I had the tools and support necessary to fight for her recovery. The next phase would require all of my diplomatic skills, medical knowledge, and emotional strength, because convincing Jennifer to change course would be just as challenging as proving Mom's cognitive abilities to the medical team. But knowing that Mom was counting on me to advocate for her gave me the motivation to face whatever conflicts lay ahead. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.